I reject all these arguments that they're too immature or they haven't learned life's lessons yet. You know, people our age aren't perfect for different reasons. That doesn't mean we can't vote. I just think it has an enormous impact on democracy, on the future of our country, on, in this case, the future of a community, a great community. I just think it makes sense in so many levels.
Hi, I'm Junius Williams, your host on the podcast, Everything's Political. And this season, we've been talking about a political phenomena here in Newark called Vote 16. It's an effort to expand the voting population. And it wouldn't have happened so smoothly and so easily without the leadership of my guest here today, Governor Phil Murphy. Now, aside from being the governor, he's also a good friend. So I'm glad to have you, Governor.
Great to be with you, Junius. Thanks for having me.
Haven't been talking to you in a while, so it's good to see you.
Nice to be here.
All right.
Cool little show you got going here.
Hey, listen, got cool people around me.
There you go.
Let me ask you first, how did you first hear about the proposal to allow 16 and 17-year-olds to vote in the school board election in Newark?
Yeah. So, first of all, again, it's great to be with you. You're one of my heroes. Secondly, this is an idea I've fallen in love with. I can't remember exactly when I first heard about it, but I heard of the GEM project. Brianna and Nathaniel are the two leaders here in Newark. Mm-hmm. Mayor Raz Baraka was a big supporter. He and I are quite close. Newark is my second home. The state capital may be in Trenton, but I spend as much time in my Newark office as I do in Trenton. And the more I heard about it, the more it made complete sense and the more I fell in love with it. On a parallel track, a former colleague of mine at the Democratic National Committee, Andy Tobias, former long-standing treasurer, is a big believer in 16 and 17-year-olds voting, period, not just in school board elections. I like that idea as well, but I think you need to take a couple of baby steps between here and there. And I think the school board elections in particular make complete sense because students, after all, 16 and 17-year-olds, after all, are students. Right. And they have a chance, and they should have a chance to have their seat at the table. Again, I think this should go well beyond Newark and well beyond school board elections. But as a start, I love it. In fact, there's not just the GEM project here, but the Vote 16 NJ team, Anjali and Yenjay are the two leaders of that. I had them at my State of the State address a year ago and made a big deal out of it. There's legislation that would take what's happening in Newark and mandate that statewide, which I'm a huge supporter of. We'll see where that goes, but I love the idea for so many reasons. I love it.
We had some of the young leaders that you mentioned on some of our earlier episodes, so I know who you're talking about.
Yep.
Now, from that perspective, how does empowering young voters shape the long-term political landscape?
How does it shape it?
Mm-hmm.
I think it shapes it for the better. You know, the irony, and you and I have talked about this over the years. In fact, there was a summit on this, and that may be the last time I saw you.
That's the last time
you and I were together at that summit.
That's right. I think it was October.
That's right.
Right.
So the irony in terms of voting turnout, and you know this, you forgot more about this than I know, but is the following. Guys your age and my age vote with a very high propensity. I'm 67. I haven't missed an election, and I can't remember how long.
Don't tell them how old I am.
I'm not going to say a word. Although I just saw a picture of you and Tom Hayden as young men, and you both look divine.
You're a politician.
This from 1965, is that?
That was 1965.
1965.
That's right.
Okay. I'm aging both you and me. But the fact is that people our age vote, and they vote at a very high propensity. Young people vote at a low propensity. Mm-hmm. What's the irony? If you're 16 years old, in today's day and age, you've probably got 100 years left in front of you, right? You and I do not have 100 years left. I hope we do, but my guess is we don't. The point being, the young people have so much more at stake in an election than you and I do. Right. And it makes, therefore, complete sense. I reject all these arguments that they're too immature or they haven't learned life's lessons yet. You know, people our age aren't perfect for different reasons. That doesn't mean we can't vote. I just think it has an enormous impact on democracy, on the future of our country, on, in this case, the future of a community, a great community. I just think it makes sense at so many levels.
The people who are already engaged in politics, I'm sure, will notice this new group of potential voters. And of course, voting means power.
Yep.
Because that's what we're talking about. Everything's political. By the way, do you think everything's political?
I hope not. I'd like to think love and affection and family and friendship are not. But these days, everybody wants to trade for something, it seems.
All right, but I digress.
That'll be another conversation.
Another conversation at another time. Maybe after you finish and go on
Maybe
away,
when I hang up
we'll have
my
a
cleats.
drink somewhere
Okay.
and talk about that, just how political it was. Anyway, looking at the Democratic Party, the mayor's office, the teachers union, how are they going to relate and incorporate all this energy and some of the issues that these young people may raise?
I hope positively. I know Mayor Baraka has certainly endorsed this in a big way, as is the city council here. I think all those institutions, Junius, will be better for it, and I hope they see it that way. I do realize there's some amount of skepticism. I mentioned some of it comes out in the, hey, a 16-year-old's not yet lived enough life to really make intelligent decisions. I reject that completely.
Yep.
They bring a perspective to this that's fresh and new and one that we need. But there's no question that's sort of the benign reason. But there's also no question that folks say, listen, this is the status quo of whatever it is, our party, our school board, our school, our organization, and the less amount of rattling around that, the better. I get that. You saw that with things like ballot design and the line and all these other things. And the fact of the matter is everything evolves. And this, to my way of thinking, is another smart evolution. Listen, we've spent, I'm in office now, it's hard for me to believe, this is year 8. And one of the passions from day one has been opening up democracy. You know, for folks who are on parole or probation, that's 80,000 folks in New Jersey who got their right to vote back, which I'm incredibly proud of, and other steps that we've taken, online registration, early voting, expanding in-person early voting, which we're going to do again for the upcoming primaries. You know, sort of one step after another. I think allowing 16 and 17-year-olds to vote is yet another step in opening up our democracy, and I think the institutions have to get their mind around it, that things evolve, and that's not a bad thing. In this case, it's a very good thing.
You mentioned about the maturity of 16-year-olds to make those decisions. I remember when I was 16, growing up in Richmond, Virginia, it was a time of segregation, and I wanted to be involved. So my senses were highly alert to what was going on, but my mother said, they don't want you involved in those demonstrations. And that was my mother trying to be cautious, because later on I met some of the leadership who said, yeah, we've had 16-year-olds. But nowadays, what do you say to young people who are not that attentive, let's say, to the politics, who feel voting really doesn't matter?
Yeah, boy, it matters. And I could give them one example after another. You know, the phrase elections have consequences. Look at Trump beating Harris and the consequences of what we've seen over the past number of weeks. Or look at close elections. Al Gore is a close friend. Look at how close his election was in 2000 in the state of Florida. Literally every vote counted. And look at the diversion of the world, the path that could have been taken that wasn't taken. I just would say, I would plead with them, again, back to our earlier part of our conversation, there's so much more at stake for a young person than there is for guys like you and me, given just the very fact that their runway of life is going to be much more meaningfully longer. Close elections, the consequences of elections, there's just a whole bunch of reasons why folks have to get out, young folks in this case, have to get out and vote. And by the way, this doesn't mean that all those young folks are 16 and 17-year-olds, right? So this conversation happens to be about vote 16 and J, which I love. But we're the 18s, the 21s, the 25s, the 30s. Their turnout numbers are not what they need to be. Everybody's got to just understand. Again, Junius, maybe the jolt to the American system right now that President Trump is applying with all sorts of chaos and volatility, maybe there's a silver lining, that there's a wake-up call there that young folks say, you know what, I better get a seat at the table here.
As it was in the 60s.
As it was in the 60s.
Right.
In all seriousness, your book and the notion of what that meant, that led to enormous change in our country, participation by the likes of you and other heroes who stood out there. By the way, Newark, New Jersey is as good an example of any of that participation. In that case, formed on the back of rage and exclusion. You'd like to think it wouldn't take those kind of jolts to the system to achieve the participation that we need, but perhaps that's the silver lining.
Personal question.
Please.
Get ready. Are there any...
I'm putting my seatbelt on, excuse me here.
Are there any issues or decisions that were made during your administration that you would have done differently if you talked to some of these 16 and 17-year-olds or other young people before you made them?
That's a good question. So the one obvious one that comes to mind, it took longer than we wanted, although this legally does not apply to a 16 and 17-year-old, so I want to make sure I say that clearly. But to get weed legalized, to get adult use cannabis legalized, took us longer than I had wanted. We got it done, and we got it done right. I look at other states that have done this, including some neighbors where they didn't do it right. Now, I say I would have been informed by a 16 or 17-year-old, but I want to also say unequivocally this is for 21 and up. So I want to make sure everybody watching out there understands that. But the perspective, in all seriousness, I think would have been richer, and not just with me, with legislative leadership, because we needed laws passed. I couldn't do that unilaterally. That's one that comes to mind. I would think because they're focused. So the election in Newark is next month. This is the first time anybody in New Jersey's ever done this. And it's a school board election. So I would think you'd get a much richer flavor around curriculum, around in-school policies. I'd be curious to see how 16 and 17-year-olds would vote as it relates to phone-free schools, which I've now become a big advocate of. And I visited a school district down in Gloucester County and did three things deliberately: attended a classroom and just observed, sat with teachers, and then sat with students. These are high school teachers and students. They're all huge fans of phone-free schools, which I was not expecting, particularly from the kids. So that's one I wonder about. How will that look when they're at the table? Their vote is at the table, I should say. And any impact that will have.
Now, you mentioned some of the aspect of in-school kind of relationships.
Yep.
How do you think the teachers are going to feel now that they know that their students might be setting policy that they have to obey?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think they will, listen, we've got the best teachers in America. We've got the #1 public education system in America. We've got the best educators. I'd like to think we have the best kids. I think they'll take it in stride. This is an informed, I would argue that the 16 and 17-year-old in a school board election will be the most informed voters in that election. I really believe that. And I think folks who have more information and more understanding, that's always, that and more transparency and more participation, that to me seems to be the formula for success. I would think educators would view this as a positive. These These folks are in schools. They know what's going on here. They understand the dynamic. They probably see things in a lot of the same respects as the educator sees things. I think they'll view it positively.
Is it enough for young people just to be registered, or do you think they're going to form organizations in schools about issues?
Yep. Being registered is not enough. As they say, I learned this when I was a diplomat, it's necessary but not sufficient. So you got to get registered. That part I get, but you got to do a whole lot more. And organizations and schools, I have to believe, will happen. And again, I don't think, Junius, and I think you agree with me, this school board elections is not the end of the story here.
Right.
This is a step toward a universal right to vote for 16 and 17-year-olds.
And certainly a beginning in their minds. I'm talking to a young person next week, as a matter of fact, who has such an organization, and he's kind of skipped the line, and he's formed his own organization already. So it's going to be interesting to see what he has to say.
I love it. Look at the GEM project. That formed here in Newark in the absence of a right to vote, 16 and 17-year-olds, but it is one of the driving forces for that right to actually become law. Again, I love what's happening in Newark. I want to see it happening all over the state.
Looking back at your own high school years, when you were 16 or 17 years old, what would have been your top issue?
I'll give you a joke one first. It took me so long to get anybody to dance with me at the high school dances. I would have wanted to add more time to the high school dances because I needed a long runway.
That was me in college.
Trust me, you travel with me to college as well. That's a great question. I'm a public school product, and I went to private college. And my high school at the time, my graduating class was 630. So it was a big high school outside of Boston. A very well-functioning school district then, and a very well-functioning high school. So I can't say that I was going home every day, wringing my hands, frustrated that X or Y weren't in the place that I wanted them to be. So nothing in particular jumps to mind, but the notion that you would be empowered. I think that notion alone, even if there's not a thing that that there's not that thing that you're focused on, but the notion that, hey, you know what? I can go out. And remember, you're not voting for teachers. Mm-hmm. You're voting for school board members who are sort of the board of directors, if you will, for any school district. And they play an enormously important function. But it's an indirect empowerment, if you will, to your daily life inside that school. You're helping elect the board that oversees the superintendent, the principals, ultimately the educators and whatnot. I just think that notion that you're empowered at that age would have put a kick in your step. And I promise you I would have voted. As you said earlier, registering is not enough. Necessary but not sufficient.
Yeah, necessary but not sufficient. Now, looking at what's necessary and perhaps would have to be considered sufficient is the whole issue about civic education. Over the years, that kind of has been pushed to the side, and we've been talking about math and science, and I've got information from young people who say we don't even need to learn how to write because we got the computer.
Yep.
What about civics? What about civic education? What has to happen with that?
So we're one of the few states, we might be the only state in America that requires you to teach a school district to have a curriculum on civics, which we've done in our administration. I'm incredibly proud of that. And as part of that, I agree with everything you said in terms of your premise. I'd add to that, which we have focused on, the following: where do you get your information? Are you going to a primary source that's been well researched by a member of the Fourth Estate, who, by the way, they may drive me crazy when they write articles about what we're doing, but the fact of the matter is we need them more than ever before.
Right. You're talking about the press.
The press. Mm-hmm. I've got 4 kids. We have this conversation all the time about where are you getting your sources. A parent, a friend of mine who's got kids, has a family rule that when you're having a conversation about current events, that you have to, at a minimum, as part of their rule, and her kids accepted it, which I'm not sure mine would, you have to double source your information.
Mm.
So it's not just that you saw it on Reddit or on TikTok or whatever, but you have to then find a second source that's primary research that would underscore it. So
like that.
A huge passion around civics. Could not agree with you more. It's been lost in the sauce. Again, I think one of the ancillary benefits of 16 and 17-year-olds being able to vote is you get to focus almost automatically a brighter light on civics in each of our roles in a democracy. So it's another reason I love it.
Governor, this has been fun. And
Yeah.
I know you got to do something else. So I'm going to just say thank you for coming. I've enjoyed this. Look forward to some more conversations.
Junius, I love you and I love being with you, and I would love to come back and continue this discussion or get at some other cool stuff that you're working on.
Oh, we got other things to talk about too.
Okay.
I'll get you.
Stay tuned.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me, man.
All right. Everything's Political Podcast is sponsored by the Center for Education and Juvenile Justice and supported by the Terrell Foundation, PSEG, and the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, and listeners like you. It is produced by Studio Mosaic and Dreamplay Media with theme music by Anthony Ant Jackson. If you like this episode, please subscribe to the Everything's Political Podcast on YouTube, press the red button, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you prefer to connect with us on Facebook and Instagram, please do so. See you next time. And remember, stay political.